"I only married you because you're the boss's daughter," my husband Oliver said casually, a smug smile on his face, as I lay in bed recovering from a cold. His words cut through me, sharper than any knife. Nearby, the scarves and gloves I had lovingly knitted for him over the years lay discarded, tossed aside as if they were worthless. His callous attitude filled me with a deep resolve. If he thought he could keep getting away with his selfish behavior, he was in for a rude awakening. Just imagining his eventual reckoning brought a quiet smile to my face. My name is Stacy Morgan, and I've been married to Oliver for 5 years. We don't have children, but until recently, I believed we were happy. Oliver is a dedicated worker, often absorbed in his career. His long hours sometimes left me feeling lonely, but he always made an effort to spend quality time with me on his days off, which made up for the distance during the week. I first met Oliver through my father, who happened to be his boss at the time. After we married, Oliver encouraged me to focus on being a homemaker, which suited me fine. I had plenty of time to explore hobbies and engage with my neighbors. Of all my activities, sewing and knitting became my passion. I loved creating things with my hands, and each winter, I gifted Oliver scarves and gloves I had made myself. At first, my creations were clumsy, but over time, my skills improved. By the 3rd year, Oliver even complimented me, saying my work was as good as anything from a store. Hearing those words from him made me feel proud and inspired me to keep going. I often dreamed of one day teaching our future child how to sew, envisioning cozy afternoons crafting together. Oliver used to humor me, saying, "Maybe I'll join in when the time comes," with a gentle smile that seemed genuine. I poured myself into supporting him, keeping the house immaculate, preparing meals, and ensuring our time together was special. Thanks to his high-paying job, we lived a comfortable life. From the outside, it must have looked ideal, and for a long time, I thought it truly was. I naively believed we'd continue our quiet, happy life together, eventually growing our family and enjoying the fruits of our hard work. But Oliver's cruel comment that day shattered the illusion. It revealed a man who saw me not as a partner, but as a means to an end. Little did he know, his complacency would be his undoing. The life I thought was peaceful began to unravel about 2 years ago, revealing cracks I hadn't noticed. It happened suddenly. I was at home, waiting for Oliver to come back from work, when I felt an intense wave of dizziness and collapsed. Oliver, who had just walked through the door, immediately rushed me to the hospital. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The conversation between Oliver and the doctor painted a grim picture. My condition wasn't life-threatening, but it wasn't mild either. It was a chronic illness I'd have to live with. The doctor recommended a prolonged hospital stay to ensure I stabilized. I felt overwhelmed and anxious, but Oliver reassured me. Holding my hand, he said, "It'll be all right. You'll be here for a while, but I'll visit whenever I can. We'll get through this together." His words comforted me, and his supportive presence gave me hope. True to his promise, Oliver visited almost every day at first. He would sit by my bedside, asking how I was feeling and bringing me my favorite sewing tools to help pass the time. On particularly dull days, he'd even join me in sewing, his clumsy attempts bringing laughter into the sterile hospital room. Teaching him how to sew became a cherished routine. Those moments of crafting and chatting made me forget the monotony of being confined. But this happiness was short-lived. After about a year, his visits became less frequent. He no longer showed up daily, then not even weekly. At first, I attributed it to his work. He must be busy, I thought, and focused on sewing a new project to surprise him when he did visit. By the time the doctor told me I could be discharged by the end of the year, I decided to make him a pair of gloves to express my gratitude for his support. Each stitch carried my feelings, a way to bridge the growing distance between us. When he finally came to see me after weeks of silence, I eagerly handed him the gloves. But instead of the warmth I expected, his response was cold. "Are you still making these?" he said, looking at the gloves with disdain. "It's frankly a nuisance."
"What?"
I stammered, disbelief hitting me like a wave. Then, he handed me the scarf I had painstakingly knitted for him the previous year. It looked untouched, as if he had never worn it. Alongside it, he handed me something else, a set of divorce papers. "I heard you'll be discharged soon," he said nonchalantly. "It's been 2 years since you've been in the hospital, and I can't keep taking care of you. We should get a divorce." The words hit me harder than any blow ever could. As I stared at the divorce papers, a numb realization washed over me. Oliver had already signed them. I thought, so it's come to this. Deep down, I wasn't surprised. Ever since he stopped visiting me at the hospital, I had considered the possibility of divorce. I tried to suppress those thoughts by convincing myself he was simply busy with work. But the Oliver I knew would never neglect me without an explanation. I had been grasping at straws, ignoring the signs that pointed to the truth. Now, the cold reality was staring me in the face. Despite the ache in my heart, I managed to ask him why he wanted a divorce. My voice was calm, not pleading or desperate. Somewhere deep inside, I had already prepared myself for this. I wasn't trying to cling to him. If Oliver had truly been the kind man I thought he was, I would have been willing to let him go without resentment. But I needed to understand why he had changed so drastically. Oliver's reply, however, was like a dagger. "Isn't it obvious?" he scoffed. "Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles. I'm sick and tired of those scarves and gloves you give me every year. Honestly, I only married you because you're the boss's daughter. Do you expect me to stick around now that you're sick on top of everything else?" His words struck like thunder, reverberating in the quiet room. I froze, processing what he had just said. As if to twist the knife further, he let out a laugh that dripped with condescension. "Who even wears handmade scarves these days without feeling embarrassed? Every time you gave me one, it was a nuisance. It annoyed me to no end." I couldn't look at him, but my eyes wandered to the scarf around his neck. It wasn't one I had made. It was a high-end designer scarf, pristine and elegant, a stark contrast to my handmade ones. It struck me then, he had probably never used any of the items I had given him. All this time, I thought my gifts brought him warmth and joy. Instead, they had been a source of irritation for him. I swallowed hard as my mind pieced everything together. After I was hospitalized, my father had retired, leaving Oliver without the pressure to maintain any pretense of kindness toward me. His job no longer depended on staying in my father's good graces and with me bedridden. I was no longer a partner, just a convenient excuse. To him, I was a burden he didn't want to carry anymore. I looked at Oliver one last time, realizing the love I once had for him was gone. In its place was a growing sense of resolve. He had cast me aside without hesitation, but he would soon discover that I was not as weak as he thought. Hearing Oliver admit how he had used my illness to gain sympathy at work left me speechless. He openly boasted about how mentioning me, his sick wife, had earned him promotions, praise, and admiration from his colleagues. His lack of remorse was chilling. When I questioned him, his smug grin made my stomach churn. The man I thought I knew, the man I once loved, was nowhere to be found. He admitted everything with such ease, as though he believed I should be grateful that my suffering had been useful to him. As for that promotion, well, I have to thank your illness for that, he said, laughing as if it was some kind of joke. I couldn't look at him. The sheer audacity and cruelty left me momentarily numb. But then, I raised my eyes and saw the truth. This was his real face, unmasked and unapologetically cruel. For a moment, I thought of arguing, of screaming, of demanding justice for the years I'd devoted to him. But I realized he wasn't worth it. Well, if I could be of help, that's good, I said softly, swallowing my pain. We probably won't see each other again, so take care. With that, I handed him the signed divorce papers. He seemed pleased, perhaps relieved. Without another word, he turned and walked out of my life. Once the door shut, I let myself weep. The tears flowed freely, not just for the loss of my marriage, but for the betrayal, the wasted years, and the illusion of the life I thought we had shared. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to my parents' home. My father was livid when he learned about Oliver's behavior. I never thought he could stoop so low, he roared, his anger palpable. But I wasn't angry anymore, I was tired. Let it go, Dad, I said, trying to calm him down. It doesn't matter now. I just want to move on. I decided to live with my parents for the time being, to heal and rebuild. Before leaving that chapter of my life entirely, I wanted to visit the house I had shared with Oliver. I needed closure. When we arrived, something felt off. The lock on the front door didn't work. Confused, my parents and I exchanged glances and rang the doorbell. A stranger answered, a man I had never seen before. Who are you? I asked, my voice trembling. The man seemed equally confused, but explained that he had purchased the house a few months ago. It dawned on me that Oliver had sold the house, the home we had shared, filled with memories, and moved on without a word. The man's wife and child appeared behind him, smiling warmly, and it was clear they were happy in their new home. My father's anger flared again, but I stopped him. It's not worth it, I said, bowing my head to the new family. Let's go. As we walked away, I realized something. That house no longer held any meaning for me. It was just a building, empty of love and trust. And just like that, I closed the door on the past and turned toward a future that, for the first time in years, felt entirely my own. The day of the meeting finally arrived. I walked into the room accompanied by my father, carrying a folder filled with meticulously organized documents. Oliver was already there, looking smug and confident, as if he thought the conversation would go his way. Hey, Stacy, he greeted casually, leaning back in his chair. So, what's this all about? I thought everything was settled. I sat down, placing the folder on the table in front of me. My father remained silent, standing behind me with his arms crossed. Oliver, I began calmly, you sold the house we lived in while I was in the hospital, without any discussion. Do you really think that's fair? He shrugged. It was my house before we got married. You didn't contribute anything to it, so why does it matter? I nodded, pretending to agree for a moment. Interesting. Let's go over a few things, shall we? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. This is the deed to the house, showing that it was transferred into joint ownership when we got married. Do you remember that? Oliver's smug expression faltered slightly. What are you talking about? I don't remember doing that. My father interjected, his tone icy. You signed the paperwork yourself, Oliver. It was part of an agreement Stacy's lawyer drafted before the marriage. I slid the deed across the table to him. Here's your signature. Feel free to double-check it. Oliver's face turned pale as he stared at the document. This doesn't make sense. Oh, it makes perfect sense, I said, pulling out the next set of papers. This is a record of all the expenses I paid for during our marriage. Household bills, repairs, groceries, and more. Nearly everything was covered by me while you used your salary for other activities. My father smirked. You can imagine how interesting your financial history looks, Oliver. We've had experts go through it. Wait a minute, Oliver stammered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. This isn't right. You can't just. And here's the kicker, I continued, pulling out one final document. The proceeds from selling a jointly owned property are considered marital assets. By law, I'm entitled to half of the money you received from selling the house. Oliver's jaw dropped. What? That's not possible. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You broke the law, Oliver. You sold the house without my consent and pocketed all the money. If you don't pay me my rightful share, I'll be forced to take legal action. My father added, and if Stacy takes this to court, your shady dealings at work might also come to light. I don't think your colleagues or bosses would appreciate that. Oliver's hands trembled as he grabbed the documents, flipping through them frantically. His confidence was crumbling with every passing second. So, I said, sitting back in my chair, what's it going to be, Oliver? Are you going to pay me what I'm owed? Or should I let the court handle this? For the first time, Oliver looked truly defeated. Fine, he muttered through gritted teeth. I'll pay you. Just don't take this any further. I smiled. feeling a sense of satisfaction. Good choice. You'll hear from my lawyer about the next steps. As Oliver slumped in his chair, my father and I stood to leave. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. This chapter of my life was finally coming to a close, and I was ready to move forward. Outside the meeting room, my father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You handled that brilliantly, Stacy. Thanks, Dad, I said, smiling genuinely. It's time for a fresh start. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining a calm yet firm tone. It's simple. You compensate my father for the land you essentially tried to sell without permission. The exact amount will be negotiated, but rest assured, it will be fair. My father chimed in, his voice steady and resolute. We don't want to ruin the lives of the family living there. They've done nothing wrong. But your deceitful actions put them in an unfair position. You're the one responsible for fixing this mess. Oliver's face was a mix of frustration and fear. His earlier smugness was entirely gone, replaced by the dawning realization that he was cornered. How much are we talking about? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My father placed another document on the table. This is a valuation of the land, based on its market value. You will pay this amount, which is the least you can do after the trouble you've caused. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action, and trust me, the buyers will join us. Oliver scanned the document with trembling hands, his face growing even paler as he read the numbers. This is outrageous. I can't afford this. You should have thought about that before making reckless decisions, I replied coldly. You wanted to act like you held all the cards, but you didn't even check the full deck. Now you're facing the consequences. He slumped in his chair, clearly defeated. Fine, he muttered. I'll figure something out. Just give me some time. Not too much time, I warned. We've been more patient than you deserve. The sooner this is resolved, the better for everyone involved. As the discussion concluded, my father gathered the documents and stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We'll expect a proper response from you within a week, he said firmly. Fail to comply, and we'll proceed with legal action. Oliver didn't respond. He merely sat there, staring at the table, his confidence shattered. After the meeting, I felt a sense of closure. Though my husband's betrayal and selfishness had left scars, standing up for myself and my family gave me a newfound strength. A week later, Oliver complied with our demands, transferring the necessary funds to my father. The land was sold to the family living in the house, ensuring their peace of mind and resolving any potential legal issues. As for me, I moved forward with my life, supported by my loving parents and the determination to rebuild. Oliver's true nature had been a painful revelation, but it also freed me from a toxic relationship. Now, I could focus on myself and the brighter future that awaited me. Sometimes, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of something better. Hearing my father's words, Oliver's face twisted with desperation. He had walked into the meeting expecting to walk away unscathed, but now he was facing the full weight of his own actions. You're bluffing, Oliver stammered. There's no way you can prove anything. My father calmly slid a few more papers across the table. These are affidavits from your colleagues who've witnessed your behavior and your remarks about my daughter. Do you still think this is a bluff? Oliver scanned the documents, his hands trembling. Each paper seemed to drain the remaining color from his face. He leaned back in his chair, utterly defeated. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, he mumbled weakly. I was under pressure. Save it. I cut him off. You weren't under pressure when you decided to use me and my illness for your own gain. You weren't under pressure when you sold the house without telling me. You made these choices because you thought you could get away with them. My father added, his tone sharp. And now, you're out of options. Whether it's compensating for the land, facing legal action from the buyers, or dealing with your own reputation at work, you've brought this upon yourself. Oliver looked around the room, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. So, what do you want from me? He asked, his voice small and trembling. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. Here's how it's going to go. You will pay for the land, either directly or through a settlement with the family. You will also pay me alimony for the emotional distress you've caused. Finally, you will stay out of my life for good. Do you understand? Oliver nodded reluctantly, too overwhelmed to argue. In the weeks that followed, Oliver complied with the terms. My father and I worked with the family who had bought the house to ensure a smooth transition of land ownership, and I received a settlement for the emotional damages I had suffered. Oliver's once promising career took a nosedive as word of his actions spread through the company. With his reputation in shambles and no assets to his name, he faded into obscurity. As for me, I began rebuilding my life. Living with my parents gave me the space to heal and rediscover my passions. I threw myself into my sewing projects, turning what had once been a hobby into a small business. Each stitch felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence and joy. Though the scars of my marriage remained, they no longer defined me. I had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, surrounded by the unwavering support of my family. The lesson was clear. True strength lies not in enduring pain silently, but in standing up for yourself and refusing to be treated as less than you deserve. Oliver's downfall was a poetic end to his manipulative ways. The life he built by exploiting others crumbled swiftly, leaving him with nothing but regret. Meanwhile, I found a sense of peace and purpose in my new chapter. Living with my parents has been a blessing. Their unwavering support has allowed me to heal emotionally and focus on rebuilding my life. Starting a sewing class was a natural step for me. It's a way to channel my passion while connecting with the community. Every week, I gather with neighborhood wives and their kids, teaching them the joys of creating something with their own hands. Whether it's a simple pillowcase or a heartfelt gift, the smiles on their faces remind me why I love sewing so much. Reflecting on the past, I can't say the journey was easy. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the sense of being used, all of it weighed heavily on me. But through it all, I learned a powerful lesson. No one has the right to take your kindness and twist it for their gain. Standing up for myself was the turning point that transformed my life. Though I once dreamed of sharing my love for sewing with my own children, I've found fulfillment in sharing it with others. Teaching my craft has given me a sense of purpose and joy that I never imagined possible. As for Oliver, his story serves as a reminder that deception and selfishness will always catch up with you. He may have thought he could take advantage of me, but in the end, his actions only led to his own undoing. Now, when I sit at my sewing machine or guide a student through their first project, I feel truly free. My life is mine to shape, stitch by stitch, into something beautiful. Because no matter how much someone tries to take from you, they can never steal your strength, your resilience, or your ability to create a brighter future.